We are almost there. Okay, we are live on Facebook and I am hitting record.
All right. Good evening. I now call the June 4th, 2020 remote meeting of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education to order. All board members are participating by simultaneous communication. Before we begin, we're going to begin this board meeting with a moment of reflection to acknowledge the killing last week of George Floyd. His tragic killing reminds us that discrimination and racism perpetuated on people of color is a stain on our nation. Discrimination and racism and inequity exist in our schools. Therefore, we must commit ourselves to anti-racism. As a white woman, I recognize that I am part of the problem. I acknowledge that my lived experience and my privilege put me in a position to have to seek understanding. I am learning and growing in areas that are hard and contentious and necessary. And my privilege also puts me in a position to act. I'm a mother to 2 children. When George Floyd called out for his mother, he was not calling me. And yet as a mother, I hear his call and my spirit responds. As a white mother, I am called to honor and to do right by all children, which includes Black and brown children in CMS and in our nation. Mr. Superintendent, did you have some words to add?
Yes, Madam Chair. The last few weeks make words difficult to find. To learn of the brutal killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, all while dealing with a global pandemic. Emotions of hurt, anger, outrage come to mind when confronted with the reality that hate, racism, and bigotry remain widespread in our country. But when I take a moment and think of our role, our work is to actively resist bias and racism, to serve as the facilitator of opportunity for all students. And we're honored to educate and to serve as a provider of hope to their families and our community. Hope that through equitable education, we can finally enable a generation of citizens capable of crafting a society where freedom and liberty are enjoyed by all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we will now have a moment of reflection, and I use the word reflection instead of silence because now is not the time to be silent. So let's take this moment to remember the victims of racial hate crimes. And during this moment, you will see our Zoom profiles go to black. Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, well, actually, hang on 1 minute. Okay, so we encourage our students and their families and the members of the community, as well as our staff, to share your voices actively so that we can bring about lasting change. And with that, we will move on with the meeting. Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Board members, as I call your name, please say present. Board Member Rhonda Cheek,
Present.
Board Member Dr. Ruby Jones, Board Member Carol Sawyer,
Present.
Board Member Margaret Marshall,
Present.
Board Member Sean Strain,
Present.
Board Member Lenora Shipp,
Present.
Board Member Jennifer Delahara,
Present.
Board Vice Chair Thelma Byers Bailey,
Present.
Board Chair Elise Dashew.
Present.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum with 9 members present.
All right. Thank you. I will now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, a motion with Myers Bailey, a second from Ms. Shipp. Let's see, all those in favor, please raise your hands and say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? All right, Madam Clerk, the agenda is adopted by a unanimous vote of 9-0. Now call on Board Member Lenora Shipp to introduce tonight's pledge leader.
I'm delighted to be able to introduce our pledge leader for tonight. He is Cleon Payne, a rising senior at Olympic High. Cleon was born in New York, but moved to Charlotte when he was 4 years old. He is the middle child of 3 boys. Cleon says he enjoys comic books, video games, and sports. He played basketball in middle school and joined an AAU team to get even more time on the court. He also plays basketball at Olympic, as well as being the captain of the school's first rugby team. His academic interests include the EY MAP program and the yearbook club. In his spare time, although it doesn't sound like he has a lot of it, he enjoys working out and spending time with friends and family, as well as his rescue dog, Diamond. He enjoys travel and has visited 4 continents. His goal is to visit all 7. Welcome, Cleon, and thank you for being our pledge leader tonight.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Liberty and justice.
It's kind of fast, isn't it?
So do you have any comments for us tonight?
I mean, I'm glad that you guys are talking about the situation with George Floyd right now, because that's pretty big in our community, especially me as a young black man. That seeing that happen in our community isn't something that's really good, and it's been happening for a while now. So I'm actually pretty glad that you guys are covering something like this, especially at this moment with all the schools we have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Payne. All right, well, we will now move to requests from the public, and the rules are as follows. Each speaker will be called in to speak one at a time. Each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes to address the board. Each speaker may speak on any topic of their choice except for individual student matters or specific personnel matters. Personal attacks will not be allowed. Profanity or other inappropriate language will not be allowed. And the board reserves the right to cut off or mute any speaker who violates these rules. And with that, please allow, let's see, we have 3 speakers tonight. So we'll start with Dee Rankin, if you could allow him into the meeting, followed by Latoya McCants, and then Latoya Owens.
Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Mr. Rankin.
How's it going?
Good. Please go right ahead. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks. To say this school year has been unpredictable, uncomfortable, and uncertain all would be understatements. We're supposed to learn from life's experiences. We're almost halfway through this year, and what have we learned? Since the pandemic began to change our everyday lives, we have adapted to remote learning, restricted social interaction, and adjusted grading policies. This past week, there is more important lesson we must pay attention to: discrimination and racism. There's a system in place that has been working against Black people in this country for years, and we are tired. The murder of George Floyd has sparked demonstrations and protests across the country because the world has recognized that the virus of racism has been running rampant in the US, and we have yet implemented restrictions to stop its hate-filled spread. Some of you may be asking, what does this have to do with education? The same frustration that is being displayed by protesting across the country is occurring in our school system. Black kids are being choked out. They're being choked out by a system that's been failing them for years. They're being choked out by a disparity gap of not being able to read nor being college or career ready when they graduate. They're being choked out by a suspension rate that targets Black kids. Just when we see society, how Black kids are being unfairly arrested in jail because of our skin color, the same treatment is occurring in our school system, with students unfairly receiving referrals and suspensions at an alarming rate. And we are tired of our kids not being educated. We are tired of our kids being suspended. We are tired. This must stop. I ask that you stop arguing over budget, focus on educating our kids. We're asking you to focus on how to decrease the achievement gap between Black and white kids. We're asking you to focus on the disproportionality of Black kids being suspended at a higher rate than their white counterparts. We're asking you to focus on providing the social and emotional supports to schools that desperately need it. Imagine how it feels to hear political bodies posture over $11 million when there are families that have been forced to budget their households after being furloughed, fired, and displaced during this pandemic. They had no choice but to figure it out. Now it's time for our school board to figure it out, just like the families have been doing during this difficult times. Do not lose sight that our kids come first. August 17th is approaching fast, and our community deserves to know what the implementation plan will be when school starts. Give us the confidence that there is an implementation plan on how we are moving forward. Can you as a school board commit to having a plan presented to the community by July 1st on what school will look like in the fall? More importantly, how are we going to change a system that's been choking out our Black kids for a long time now? I'm asking you, be intentional, be bold, and learn from the lessons of life that has thrown us thus far. Remember, excellence and equity should be in every plan and decision that is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. Do we have Ms. McCants? Hi, Ms. McCants, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I want to take the time to respond to the letter that was posted on Facebook by CMS on May 31st, 2020, titled, "We Must Join Together." Just like liberty and justice for all is a great concept and not a reality for some Americans, your letter came across in the same fashion. Charlotte is last in the country when it comes to upward mobility, which means if you are born poor here, you would die poor here. The school system plays a huge part in that. Education is a great equalizer. We all know that from a historical standpoint, inequities in our education system has been to the detriment of Black and brown kids, and CMS is no stranger to that. If CMS has not made sure that every child within their school district currently has access to the same education, educational opportunities, and resources, you're not living up to the words in that letter. If your statement, "We are committed to do our part in the community to ensure that ours is an educational system that embraces our obligation to educate all who attend our schools and to make sure we do not tolerate the mindset that there is such a thing as good enough," was truly a focus, you would throw every resource at schools that are literally school to prison / welfare pipelines. My hope is that you guys actually have the difficult conversations and develop actionable solutions that leverage the power of education to lift up those who are in need the most. While you guys are working on that, let me remind you that during this current social unrest and current political climate, we have all been reminded that being properly educated is not an option for Black and brown kids. The academic rigor can only be so high when the majority of the school is not meeting the state standard. And when discipline is a huge problem, which is most likely due to the lack of diversity training for teachers, staff, and a general lack of diversity in the student population in low income and low performing schools, the learning process is hindered. My goal as a parent is to raise a child who will become a productive citizen. How can we accomplish that in a lackluster, low performing education environment? If it is truly school choice, which it hasn't been for us, my only option has always been private. It would not matter which school I chose. My child would be properly educated whether she lived in Uptown, Ballantyne, or West Boulevard. The quality of education should not be determined by the zip code. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCants. Ms. Owens.
Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Latoya Owens. Thank you for this space tonight. No problem. The question I want to introduce for the board for consideration is, how do we provide a safe space for Black students in public schools? And what does it mean to keep Black children safe? What we know is Black students largely experience their first encounters with racism at the hands of teachers and peers in elementary school. We also know police departments across America, including CMPD, have a contemptuous relationship and a history of inequity, brutality, and murder in Black communities, with no recourse for victims. Not too long ago, Jonathan Ferrell was a victim of a multitude of discriminatory and racist acts that resulted in his death in 2013. After a near fatal car accident, a 24-year-old Ferrell knocked on a door for help. A woman immediately reported a break-in or attempted intruder. CMPD showed up and killed him within minutes. As a recent college graduate, a football player, a model citizen with no record, survived a car accident only to be murdered minutes later. Case resulting in a hung jury, was not retried, and a murderer walked free. The Black students in your school system bear the burden of these murders. They walk into your schools daily and deal with institutionalized racism enforced by teachers and principals through curriculum, inequitable execution of school policies, such as dress codes more harshly enforced on Black girls than any other population, and the underrepresentation of Black educators. For instance, my own sister attended Community House Middle School at a time where the only Black adults she encountered daily were the custodial and cafeteria staff. This is not a unique experience, as this type of underrepresentation is seen widely across the southern portion of your district. The multitude of inequitable factors create a hostile experience for students of color. Your board is responsible for reconsidering policies that serve not to just pacify, but that reconsidering policies that currently serve to pacify, but do not directly address the work against racism in your district. There are apologists for racist principals or racist actions by principals, little to no recourse for racist acts by students. And all of this is exemplified in various schools highlighted in the media, such as Audrey Kell High School. Of course, we cannot forget the overrepresentation of students of color in suspensions and expulsions across all districts in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and across all districts across the nation. With the heightened fears of parents of color, it is time to move beyond a surface consideration of diversity, inclusion, or multiculturalism to a collaboration with experts that addresses deep-rooted issues of racism and results in concrete policy change for students. I've noted my specific questions in the letters I penned to the board, but I want to review them now. What community safety policies exist or are being crafted to guard against in-school police brutality and inequitable execution of school rules more broadly? How is effectiveness of this being tracked, and how are you collecting student experiences?
Thank you, Dr. Owens. Thank you very much. All right. Madam Clerk, If there were any public comments that were sent via email, will you please read those into the record at this time?
Madam Chair, we received no public comment emails.
All right, thank you. This ends the public comments portion of our agenda. Is there a motion that the board approve the consent agenda items? I see.
Motion to approve.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
It's okay, I heard, I saw hands first, but by voice I heard Ms. Marsh, a motion from Ms. Marshall, a second from Ms. De La Hara. Before we move to a vote, does any board member wish to pull any part of this item for individual consideration? All right, hearing none. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hands and say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? All right, Madam Clerk, our consent agenda is approved by a unanimous vote of 9-0. Colleagues, we have one action item tonight, and that is the temporary suspension of the GPA provision in policy JJJ.
Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, before you move to the action items, would you like to recognize the superintendent for any personnel appointments?
Oh, yeah, I am sorry about that. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure this evening to introduce two personnel items for this evening. The first is Xavier Foggy, who currently serves as the Professional Development Specialist in our Central One Learning Community. I am introducing Ms. Foggy as the new and proud principal of Lawrence Orr Elementary School. Prior to her current role, she served as also an assistant principal at Allenbrook Elementary, an academic facilitator at Irwin Academic Center, as well as a teacher at Irwin. She's also been a teacher at Honeytown Farms Elementary School. I know Ms. Foggy is with us this evening, and so I would like to congratulate her on her new role as principal at Lawrence Orr. Ms. Foggy, if you have any brief comments, would you like to share those with us this evening?
Sure, thank you. First, I'd just like to thank the school board and you, Superintendent Winston. I know we kind of go back to Irwin, so I'm grateful to be in this position. I'd also like to thank the Chief of School Performance, Kathy Elling, and all of her support, and my learning community superintendent, Dr. Barnes. I am honored and I'm eager to serve the students and families of Lawrence Orr. I also have my husband, he's over here with me. I'd like to thank him too for all of his support.
Thank you, Ms. Foggy. Look forward to hearing great things from you.
Absolutely.
Next, Madam Chair and board members, I'd like to introduce Ms. Leah Davis as the new Executive Director for the Central 2 Learning Community. Currently, Ms. Davis serves as the proud principal at Ridge Road Middle School. Prior to that, she served as a principal at Torrance Creek Elementary, at Albemarle Road Elementary, and Montclair Elementary. She has also served as an assistant principal at two of our schools, Winding Springs and Davidson Elementary Schools. And prior to that, she served as a principal intern at Idlewild Elementary and served as a member of the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program. Congratulations, Ms. Davis. Welcome to this new role, and would like to offer you an opportunity to share any remarks that you'd like to make. Brief remarks, I should say.
Hello, good evening, everyone. First, I would just like to say it has been my pleasure to serve the Charlotte community in various principal roles, and I am thrilled and excited about the opportunity to serve as the Executive Director in Central 2 and work closely with Learning Community Superintendent Tara Lynn Sullivan. And I too would like to thank you and the board for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. That concludes my remarks, Madam Chair.
All right, so now we shall move on to the action item. So we have one action item tonight, the temporary suspension of the GPA provision in policy JJJ. Before the board acts, I'm going to turn to the superintendent to introduce this item and to make a recommendation to the board.
There we go. Thank you again, Madam Chair and board members. We're asking with this particular agenda item, temporary suspension of provisions in policy JJJ. Specifically, what we're asking is that middle and high school student athletes who meet local promotion standards for the 2019-20 school year have the 2.0 GPA requirement suspended or waived, if you will, for the first semester only of the 2020-21 school year. And so 2020-21 second semester student athletes must meet the 2.0 GPA requirement. And the rationale for this request is so we know that COVID-19 has impacted academic opportunity and consistency for CMS students during the 2020 spring semester. And then there are circumstances that resulted in the impact or out of the control of our school, our students, and our families. And so the North Carolina High School Athletic Association Board of Directors made the same decision for their academic minimum class load requirement for the first semester of the 2020-21 school year. And so I would like to request, Madam Chair and board members, that the board temporarily suspend the provisions in policy JJJ.
Okay. Before we go to a motion, does anybody have any questions? All right, is there a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation to suspend the 2.0 GPA requirement for extracurricular activity participation during the first semester of the 2020-2021 school year, provided a student meets local promotion standards from the 2019-20 academic year?
Motion made.
Second.
Motion from Ms. Cheek, a second from Ms. Sawyer. Any discussion or debate before we move to the vote? All right, Madam Clerk, will you please call for the vote? You're muted.
Board Member Rhonda Cheek, how say you?
Yes.
Board Member Dr. Ruby Jones, how say you? Board Member Carol Sawyer, how say you?
Yes.
Board Member Margaret Marshall, how say you?
Yes.
Board Member Sean Strain, how say you?
Aye.
Board Member Lenora Shipp, how say you?
Yes.
Board Member Jennifer Delahara, how say you?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Thelma Byers Bailey, how say you?
Yes.
Board Chair Elise Dashew, how say you?
I say yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes by a vote of 9-0.
All right, thank you. So we'll now move on to our reports and information items. First, we have a report on budget amendments for April of 2020, and I turn to the superintendent for this report.
As presented.
Thank you. Next, report on financial statements for April of 2020. I turn to the superintendent for this report.
As presented.
Thank you. And next, we have a management oversight report on the Office of School Performance. Turn to the superintendent for this report.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and board members. As my colleague Kathy Elling I would normally say making her way to the podium, but is joining us on this Zoom call. This is the second of 3 consecutive management oversight reports that we will be presenting to the board, all under the Office of Academics, led by Dr. Matt Hayes, our Deputy Superintendent of Academics. And so Kathy Elling, who is our Chief School Performance Officer, will kick us off with this report. And I would just like to lift up, before she does, the intentional collaboration that exists across all of the departments in the Office of School Performance to really create an integrated services model for students, as well as the learning community superintendent role as far as the school improvement planning process goes. And with that, Ms. Elling, I'm going to hand off to you.
Thank you, Superintendent Winston. Good evening, board members. It's certainly my pleasure to be with you tonight. And I see Dr. Penn has joined us. She will be running the slideshow. I can multitask, but running slideshows and trying to talk in this environment is not my strong suit. So we're going to divide and conquer. We appreciate your patience. So it is an opportunity for us, we're glad to have, to present you with what we call an executive summary of our work in the Office of School Performance, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you have at the end. So with that, we'll go to our second slide. Perhaps.
Are you not seeing it?
I'm not seeing it. You're seeing it.
I am sharing.
Yeah, we're seeing the first slide, but we're not seeing your second slide.
There has been a glitch with this second slide. Do you see slide 3 right now?
We're
No.
still seeing slide
Okay.
1.
Let me stop sharing and start again. Let's try that again.
Sorry, Dr. Penn, I may have jinxed you.
It's okay. All right, what are we seeing now?
That's
Slide 1.
Slide 1. Let's see if we can get to 2. 2? No 2.
Dr. Penn, I'll share on my end, okay?
Thank you. Let's go for
Perfect.
that.
Nicole, we'll just say next slide if that's okay with you. Appreciate your patience. There we go. Thank you. So what the Office of School Performance was originated in 2012 as a comprehensive one-stop office of support for learning communities. It was comprised at that time of learning community superintendents, executive directors, and curriculum coordinators. As shown on the slide, you can see that we have expanded to include the departments that you see above. And we're not going to talk about those departments specifically, but I am going to share with you how we've collaborated across departments. We're going to highlight 2 tonight. It's the role of learning communities and the role of student wellness and academic support. So the Office of School Performance in its current configuration has focused on collaboration to better serve our students. If you were to look at our department work plans or division work plans, you would see us focused on 2 broad goals. One is to create an integrated service model across all departments in the service of students. One day, I hope to come back to you and say it's a seamless service model. That's our goal, but right now we're working on integrating across a variety of departments, and I'd like to highlight 2 specific actions this year. Previous to this year, as you know, we provide services for students in hospital, and we also provide services for students who are in homebound status due to either medical conditions, which require medical support, but these students are general education primarily, and then we also provide services on the exceptional children's side. These were two separate and distinct programs housed in two different parts of our division. And this year we provided an opportunity to collapse those departments so that we could better provide support for students across the spectrum of gen ed all the way through our most significant needs and exceptional children. The second thing I'd like to highlight, which is the fourth bullet on the screen, is our social emotional academic development. And that we call that SEED, S-E-A-D, and it is a steering committee made up of principals at all levels, our equity superintendents, learning community staff, and Dr. Lisa Barnes' staff. And they are charged with providing input and guidance on the implementation of the recommendations for the CASEL report. CASEL stands for the Collaborative of Academic Social Emotional Learning, and we contract with them a year ago to do an on-site SDL district readiness assessment for us. Some of you on the board at that time, I believe, were interviewed as part of that process. This team is charged with executing and helping us execute on the recommendations of the CASEL report. The other thing this team has done has been involved in the selection of our SEL screener and pilot for K-8 with the selected tool, and also around processes for selecting the SEL curriculum for K-8. And Dr. Penn's going to reference that a little bit later. So as we go to the next slide, Dr. Penn's going to talk to you a little bit about our second big bucket of work, which is our commitment to community connections.
Yes, and so across the departments that fall under the Office of School Performance, we pride ourselves in ensuring that we have appropriate and necessary relationships with a broad range of community organizations, in part to address a broad range of the concerns that were lifted by some of the speakers tonight at the start of the board meeting. So one relationship that I would like to highlight is our extensive multi-layered partnership with Thompson Child and Family Focus. Thompson's is a reputable community-based organization that provides a broad range of child-related services and supports within our community. 2 years ago, we partnered with Thompson's to provide deeply integrated social, emotional, and mental health supports at our Turning Point Middle School location, which we currently have located on their St. Peter's Lane campus. We have also integrated Thompson's supports at our high school now after applying for and receiving a state school safety grant. So beyond the Turning Point Academy integration, we also use Thompson's as a school-based mental health provider, and they are now the new managing agency for A Child's Place, which provides critical partnership support for parents of our homeless students. Another partnership I'd like to highlight that speaks directly to community concerns related to disproportionate minority contact with police, as well as the issue of disproportionate suspensions, and that is, again, our school justice partnerships. That is a county committee that is comprised of juvenile court judges, the Department of Juvenile Justice, our Sheriff's Department, local police agencies, and school district leaders, including myself, the department head for student discipline and behavior support, as well as Frank Barnes, our chief accountability officer. We are focused on working together to reduce disproportionate minority contacts with police and to reduce the use of exclusionary discipline or out of school suspension with minority students. And so if we move on to the next slide, Kathy will share a bit more information about our theory of action.
Thanks, Co-Train. So when we were designing the strategic plan, the subsequent theory of action of how we were going to get there, you'll notice that we intentionally called out the role of community superintendents in improving student outcomes through a focus on the instructional core. So it's twofold. It's collaborating with schools to ensure that there's a strong shared vision of instructional practice. And then through our work with Richard, in referencing Richard Elmore's work around strong instructional core, we have centered on a definition of what we consider the instructional core to be as a district. So we are now all talking and looking for key characteristics of an instructional core, which when I first began as a learning community superintendent, I think one of our superintendents referenced probably appropriately that we were a system of schools, or we were a series of mini districts as learning communities, but that has shifted to a school district and a unified approach both around instruction and professional learning, which I'm going to talk about both of those things. So in our next slide, you're going to see that the learning community superintendents perform two really critical functions. They're intentionally positioned in our district to serve both as connectors and bridges between central office and schools. From the beginning, the Office of School Performance aligned closely with academics and accountability, and now equity, to speak with a unified voice around our core business, which is improving student outcomes with a whole child focus. LC superintendent teams are comprised of, which I've referenced as the executive director and curriculum coordinator, to focus on improved classroom instruction with an accompanying system of accountability with routine monitoring and school visits. Years ago, I might go visit schools and look for certain characteristics, and my colleague as another learning community superintendent might look for different characteristics, all looking for qualities of instruction. But at that time, the district had not centered on a unified set of criteria for what we were going to observe in instruction, and that has changed. So superintendents now conduct school visits around key core actions, which I know you've heard Brian Kingsley reference as part of our academic look-fors. So that's important for you to know. They also provide differential support, both in the quantity and numbers of touches to schools, but also in the staffing and supports we provide. And I'd like to highlight Central One as an example where we have provided additional positions, which include the PD specialist role, which Xavier Foggy is stepping out of to take over a principalship, multi-classroom leader, tech facilitator, community engagement coordinator, and additional executive director for that learning community. So I also want to highlight that learning community superintendents serve both as brokers of service for schools and as connectors between various departments to better coordinate and streamline supports for schools. And this is important because we are a large organization and we need to be able to have information flow between central office departments and learning community superintendents. So we now have learning community representation in all of our major teams, including HR, academics, accountability, primarily to inform and support the development of processes that align to school needs by their tier, and also in some cases to remove barriers so that the principals can divert their attention to our core business, which is student outcomes and observing the instructional practices. So as we move to the next slide, you're going to see that another key function is leadership development. And the greatest asset in any organization is its people. So with the support of you, our board and cabinet, CMS has been able to partner with local universities, and I'll just name the two, UNC Charlotte and Queens, as well as noted national organizations, including the Wallace Foundation, to support our critical leadership work. I'd like to highlight specifically two aspects. One is executive directors. They have been tasked with developing professional learning and support for assistant principals. So they are the frontline folks to design professional learning, to prepare assistant principals for the principalship, along with the direct support and coaching that the principals provide. I would also like to highlight that our LC SUPs over the course of several years have been involved in work related to the Wells Foundation about how to be better principal supervisors. And that's been very important work, and that has moved the dial for us. The third thing I'd like to highlight is that we just received a Wallace exploratory grant, which will enable us to rethink and revise the CMS principal pipeline with a focus on equity. One, to ensure that we have a diverse and highly qualified administrative bench. So the Office of School Performance is excited to be able to collaborate with a newly created CMS Department of Ed Leadership under the direction of Penny Presley as we continue to design and deliver professional learning opportunities for schools and district personnel in service of the strategic plan. So with that, we're going to transition now to talking about the other department tonight, and that is the student wellness and academic support. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Penn for that.
Thank you, Kathy. So student wellness and academic support is in year 2 of a 5-year plan whose overarching goals are in direct service of the district's strategic plan goal 3, which is increased social and emotional supports for students. Goal 1 of our 5-year plan, thus far we have undertaken activities including working with district staff, our school board, and our Board of County Commissioners in support of reducing the student to staff ratios by increasing the number of school counselors, social workers, and psychologists. We've also worked and will continue to work to educate and clarify about the roles and skill sets, as well as the specialized training that counselors, social workers, and psychologists possess. This is important because we have to optimize the way that these staff are used in support of students. Finally, we are working on building a focus on school-wide prevention services and social, emotional, and academic skill development. So we've got to provide more services that meet the needs of every student so that we don't have to spend as much time addressing the individual, more intensive student needs. That is the prevention arm of our work. Goal 2 focuses on building and maintaining a baseline skill set for all counselors, social workers, and psychologists in CMS. No matter where your student attends school, your student should be able to receive the same high quality services as well as some specialized services based on the unique needs of your population. We have also invested significant time and funding into evidence-based social, emotional, and behavioral practices, and that will continue. And then we're working to develop a standardized menu of highly effective evidence-based interventions to ensure that all students, again, regardless of their school, have access to appropriate interventions to meet their needs. Goal 3 focuses on aligning and integrating the work of student wellness and academic support with that of other department stakeholders. So going on to the next section, or the next slide, thank you. The work that we are focused on in this 5-year plan is in service of some critical desired student outcomes. The outcomes that we're looking to see include improved social and emotional well-being of students as measured by our social and emotional learning screener, which is called Panorama. We're also looking to see reduced suicidal ideation. In our high school students in the most recent Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 18% reported that they have seriously considered suicide. In our middle school students, 24% reported that they have seriously thought about suicide. We've got to get those numbers down by providing more prevention services, more work on coping skills and positive strategies to deal with stress and anxiety, and also by providing more intensive counseling services to students. The other marker that we're looking for is that students will see their counselors, social workers, and psychologists as trusted adults. As the availability of these staff increases in schools, what we expect to see is students and counselors, social workers, and psychologists having stronger relationships and more frequent interactions so that students will have a mental health expert that they can go to when they're struggling or to talk to about their college and career aspirations and get support with their planning. And then finally, with these professionals working in collaboration with school leaders on school-wide behavioral, social, and emotional needs, we expect to see improved culture and climate, resulting in families seeing schools as more supportive and safe places. So next, I want to talk to you about the critical components of increasing access to social and emotional support. So our first major move in working to increase access is related to staffing. So the first thing that we've worked to do is update allotment practices as we've received more positions. We are working towards providing a social worker for every school. At this point in time, we currently have a social worker in every Title I school. And this year, the 1920 school year, is the first year that we've been able to now begin pushing social work services into our non-Title I schools. We hope to continue this as we move forward. This year, we've also designated a school social worker to support families living in shelters and hotels. Regarding our allotment practices for school psychologists, we currently use school enrollment numbers to assign school psychologists, but we also look at other factors that influence the needs of that student population. For example, while Turning Point Academy is overall a small school with low enrollment on any given day, they do have a full-time school psychologist because we recognize the need for a staff member who can not only provide behavioral consultation and support to staff, but also to provide direct services to students. We know that a school's ability to build strong, effective social, emotional, and behavioral systems is foundational to their ability to produce strong academic outcomes. So in collaboration with the EC department or Exceptional Children's Department, Student Discipline and Behavior Support, we are in the process of reimagining and repositioning staff to focus on supporting schools with their school-wide behavioral programming and social and emotional supports. And again, this is about prevention. This is about helping schools to build an environment that is supportive to their students. A next move that we are making is in an effort to relieve school counselors of very time-intensive other duties as assigned, we have used state funding to create Section 504 counselor positions. This is a federally mandated program that is high demand. And so we have now Section 504 counselors supporting 20 of our schools who had a high number of Section 504 plans. That allows those counselors to rededicate their time to providing critical prevention and intervention services to the students. Finally, we continue to grow our school-based mental health program. In the 2014-15 school year, that program served about 40 schools, and now at 1920 is in 137 schools, and we plan to continue to work to grow that program. Next, I want to share a bit of information about what we're doing to build the content knowledge of staff. So there are a number of different types of professional development and learning communities and collaboratives that we have participated in related to being able to better support the social and emotional needs of students and also to build better environments for our students. So I want to highlight our Reconnect for Resilience teacher workshops. We were awarded a state grant to offer training for 200 school-based staff who are working at schools who primarily serve students from our public health priority zip codes. Reconnect for Resilience is a training where teachers learn about primary and secondary trauma, and they learn strategies to use in their classroom to build and support resilience. We will continue this work beyond the grant in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Health Department and their RECAST grant. The next thing that we are working on is our practices. So knowledge is great, but having strong practices to implement in support of student outcomes is critical. So I want to point out the graphic on the screen. That is the CASEL wheel, and Kathy mentioned CASEL earlier, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. The wheel where you see the orange, yellow, and green represents the core social and emotional competencies. So when we talk about social and emotional learning, we're not talking about mental health, and we're actually not talking about behavior either. We're talking about critical personal and interactional skills that allow a student to be confident, competent, and successful in a social environment. And so not only do students need these skills, but staff have to be able to possess and display these skills as well. And so while we are working to work with staff to be prepared to support students, some of what we have done thus far is adopt Caring Schools Community. This is a class meeting-based social and emotional learning program that is available to all K-8 schools. At this point in time, we have 70 schools active or preparing to adopt. Likewise, and again, this meeting's public comments were very pertinent to what we're talking about right now. When we look forward to 2021, we are planning to offer a 28-hour advanced classroom management course for teachers. This is an area that is often identified as an area of need for teachers. And so from that class, they will learn critical skills to build a positive classroom environment and to respond more effectively to the classroom management needs that are presented in their environment. we will offer a similar course for administrators to enable them to offer stronger coaching support to teachers on the topic of classroom management. Moving on to the next area. In response to COVID, the work of the Office of Student Wellness and Academic Support has not changed. We've carried on business as usual, but remote. However, we have had to adopt some new practices. During the school year, we worked diligently to address the attendance concerns of students, but under remote learning, there's actually no such thing as attendance. And so what we've talked about more is engagement. And so we have formed what we've called the CMS Street Team. And this is a team of social workers, counselors, psychologists, and some additional Spanish-speaking CMS staff who over the last month have worked to conduct home visits for students who, despite all other efforts by their school, were unable to be contacted. We started with a list of 3,000 students. And after being able to identify some content in PowerSchool, we were able to reduce that to 2,000 because we learned that about 1,000 of them had at least been going in and checking PowerSchool. With those 2,000 visits, all of which will be completed by tomorrow, we are excited to be able to say we have been able to attempt to locate everybody on the list. The data that you see in front of you is as of last Friday, May 29th. And out of the 2,000 students that we were attempting to locate, about 40%, that 38% there, sometime after May 4th, those students engaged online. And so we did not have to conduct home visits for about 38% of the 2,000. We located 35% of those students by doing home visits. And then there were about 12% who were not able to be found. And again, that 15% we are addressing over the course of this week and expect to close out tomorrow. I want to share some of the anecdotal observations from my street team members and what it is that they're seeing when they're going out to look for families. Some of the most concerning things that they have found is that some of our K-8 parents have had language barriers that have prevented them from being able to gain access to the information that they needed. For example, we had families who told our Spanish-speaking teams that their student did not know how to log in and the parent was not able to assist them because of the language barrier. Or that because of language barriers, they were not able to understand what the expectations were that the school had for them. And then the other thing that's recurrent in comments from our Spanish language team is that there were device problems like a broken Chromebook or a missing charger, but the parents did not know how to pursue support to get that issue addressed. Fortunately, we equipped our street team with hotspots and with Chromebooks, so they were able to change out devices and things if families were having issues of that nature. We also found, again, from our Spanish-speaking street team, significant financial hardship where one of our teams had multiple parents tell them that it's rent or Wi-Fi. Now, again, we have had hotspots available, but due to language barriers and maybe a lack of communication in the native language, parents felt like they were having to make a choice. So through the street team, we were able to provide parents with hotspots if they did not have them. The other thing that we saw across populations, whether English speaking or other languages, is out of date PowerSchool contact information or children being sent to stay elsewhere because a parent had to work during the time that schools were closed. Whether or not we were able to establish contact with the family, we left behind a letter in English and Spanish. And if we made contact with the family, we worked with them to identify any needed resources, whether those be basic needs or school-related needs. So again, street team visits will wrap up tomorrow, and we will have made attempts to contact all students who remained on the list. So now I'm going to pass back to Kathy, and we will go to the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. So we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we are in very extraordinarily unusual times. And I hate even saying that because everybody's using the word extraordinary times. That is accurate. But I would like to also highlight that while we have been dealing with this stress and the uncertainty, our staff has continued to do things that we would do if we were in person. So there has been a tremendous amount of family and student outreach, not only from the staff members that report to CoTrain, but also members of Dr. Lisa Barnes's team have reached out to parents and families that they had families that we had serviced in our short-term suspension centers. You recall that we have a partnership where we're trying to get kids back, recoup learning time, and that the members of both of these teams have been providing that. I think it's extraordinary to note that individual counseling services have continued as appropriate, that our crisis support lines are maintained every day. Principals get a beautifully worded, I've got to say, inspirational email from CoTrain regarding the day, and here's who to contact. And that has been really, I think, pretty special. Crisis support services are, in terms of threat assessments, suicide assessments, those things are still happening as needed. CoTrain's team worked on social emotional lessons, both as standalone, but also as embedded in curriculum and available to teachers, so that as they zoomed in with students, they had access to that. And I will say our exceptional children's department, which had an incredibly hard and heavy lift to contact each parent to determine the level of service that the student needed and how we're going to deliver that service in an appropriate way, has maintained that level of contact. And we've delivered speech services remotely. So I do think while we have had a tremendous amount of challenge, I'm incredibly grateful and proud of our staff's ability to be flexible and adaptable in their thinking to continue to provide services for students and families in ways that required a lot of thinking and not a lot of turnaround time. So with that, I'd like to close and just say we are grateful for your support as a school board and the county's support of our continued efforts with mental health and increasing our staffing in that area. And we'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
I don't have a question. I do have a comment, and I want to say I truly appreciate the great work that you all are doing. It's very informative, and quite frankly, it's very heartwarming to see the tenacity and just the kind of commitment you all have made to doing the work in these very troubled times that we are in. So I want to say thank you to staff and to volunteers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I see Ms. Byers-Bailey, and then I see Ms. Shipp.
Thank you. I too want to thank you for the exceptional work that you're doing out in the community, especially with your street teams. I don't know whether it was coincidental or providential, but I know that the West Side Education Think Tank had raised that issue, and you could not have responded as quickly as you did if you hadn't already been planning it. So it just really made my heart feel good that I could go back to that group and say, you asked for it one week and the next week it's on the ground. If you hadn't had that in the works already, you could not have pulled that off as quickly as that. So I want to thank you.
Ms. Shipp?
And some of it's been said already too. I want to just say thank you. It is so timely what you are doing in this area. Definitely needed. And we know our children have so many needs, especially with the social and the emotional and the well-being. And I thank you for what you're doing with teachers, because like you say, it's important that they are trained. It starts in the classroom. So the amount of work that you're doing with professional development with the teachers that leads to the classroom work with children is where it really meets the road. The rubber meets the road and everything comes together. So thank you so much for this department's work. The street team, that's, as Ms. Byers-Bailey has said, that's just excellent. That's just phenomenal to be able to do that kind of work in these times. So thank you so much for what you all have done.
Thank you.
I see Ms. De La Hara, and then I see Ms. Sawyer.
I also want to thank you and commend the great work that has been taking place. This report is really informative and important to give us a solid idea of all the work that would have been going on anyway and how you've been able to adapt and change. In thinking about the street teams, I've got a couple questions. I know that figure was from last Friday, I believe. And the last time we spoke, I believe you obviously had made some more progress. I guess I think it would be good for the public to hear, because the last time we spoke, you mentioned a few comments about what you do encounter sometimes and have moved, etc. Could you maybe describe, and then I do have one more question after this, but could you maybe describe what some of the challenges have been, why we may not be able to find some of the students?
I do think one of the biggest kind of most basic problems that will probably be easiest to solve is out-of-date PowerSchool contact information. And so if we have the wrong address, the wrong phone number, and no email address, and honestly, it is email that is least likely to change. We're attempting to contact parents, but PowerSchool is not updated. And so I think that is one area of concern that I think during a traditional school day is maybe less pressing because I can put a note in a backpack. But I think we've learned from going remote that we have got to keep PowerSchool updated. And I think there's opportunity for us to look at some options for how we can either add more numbers or just update our practices for how we keep our contact records up to date. So that's the most basic thing that we're encountering. For some of our younger students, we had families who just did not have Wi-Fi access and maybe had not gone to pick up academic packets.
Okay, and before I ask my second question, maybe I'll just suggest, since this work is finishing tomorrow, one idea would be to push out the continued efforts, particularly since you mentioned some the Spanish-speaking community and other communities through organizations. I know International House is going to be working in the Briarwood Elementary community this summer, and one of their goals is to include updated information, access to resources, what's going on with CMS, and that they may have people out in the community who are already going to visit some of the students that can make those contacts and help make sure that numbers and email addresses and things like that are updated and in multiple languages. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, I really appreciate the efforts to reach the Spanish-speaking community. I'm just wondering about what other languages and challenges it seems that it would be great to partner with like Refugee Support Services and other organizations that have bilingual capabilities in many languages, but there might be a privacy issue with that, like involving outside community members. So I don't know if you have used that or if that's even appropriate, but I guess just the general question of how can we reach other communities that are not Spanish speaking?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's a great question in general. For our street teams, what we did was we used our International Center and our interpreter line for languages other than Spanish. We had very few other languages, but where they did occur, there might have been 2 or 3 who spoke Jirai, for example, and 1 or 2 that were French. But so we used our interpreter line for this work. But I think the question of how do we make sure that this very detailed information that parents need when we are in a remote learning environment, how do we make it accessible to them? And I think that your suggestion around Refugee Support Services, but also just other community organizations that are central to various immigrant communities would be great partners. And we could definitely work with our Smith Family Center and International Center to make those connections. I think that's a great idea.
I'd like to add, Jennifer, I think you lift up an opportunity for these trusted community partners who know families to communicate to them. We can only update Empower School addresses if parents give them to us. I just can't do it unless I get it. So to bridge that gap of comfort, it's okay. We need it. And particularly in the environment that we're in, we could access that in a more, I think, beneficial way. And I appreciate you lifting that up.
All right, Ms. Sawyer and then Mr. Shul.
I think Ms. Marshall had a question as well.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I am gladdened to see the sort of staff development that's happening around classroom management, behavior supports. Can you help connect those programs to how they might shift our disproportionality in discipline incidences? And
Sure.
does the training support that?
So yes, the training supports that. And the connection that I will make between training on, say, Reconnect for Resilience, which builds teachers' ability to create a trauma-informed classroom environment, which means that they will be able to use strategies that support students in de-escalating, or even more importantly, support students in coming in and being able to get grounded and centered so that they don't escalate. Likewise, with the classroom management, of course, what we will often say is that most suspensions start in the classroom, right? And so the behavioral incident that ultimately leads to suspension most of the time starts in the classroom. And so how that teacher is able to navigate the situation can either escalate it, or they can nullify the situation and be able to move forward, not only with instruction, but also for the student to be able to move forward with their day uninterrupted. And so teachers having the opportunity to build their skills in classroom management, the first thing that says, and again, one of our speakers tonight raised this point, whether or not a student has a behavior problem is often an environmental function, right? So I might be fine in Ms. Sawyer's class, but have a lot of behavior problems in Ms. Marshall's class. The difference is the classroom, not me, right? And so when we can build teacher skills in that way, because the student stays in the classroom, over time we reduce incidences of discipline, whether it leads to suspension or not.
Is racial bias awareness baked into these trainings?
So not directly to my knowledge. I will say the Reconnect for Resilience training does talk about different types of trauma. And we have, when I talk about our public health priority zip codes, I'm talking about the area that's frequently called the Crescent in our community. And that is a community that has the highest volume of 911 calls, the highest volume of overdoses. And so these are children who live in these communities. While they themselves may not have been physically harmed or abused or neglected, they witness a lot, they experience a lot. These are our kids who go to sleep hearing gunshots and hoping that it doesn't come through their house. So they're living with a degree of toxic stress that negatively impacts not only their ability to function and perform in school, but over time it actually impacts their physical health. And so Reconnect for Resilience certainly addresses that. The Advanced Classroom Management course is very much about how I, as the instructor, position myself to interact with students. And so it is about how the adult responds to behavior. And I don't know that there's a significant component around race and bias in that, but it does challenge the teacher to think about their thinking. It's about that metacognition and why am I thinking this way?
Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Shul and then Ms. Marshall and then Ms. Cheek.
First of all, I just want to echo what a lot of other people said, which is that I really found the report especially informative and especially attuned to what I think students' needs are, both before and now in the crisis. But I still did have some questions, most of them relating to the reducing suicidal ideation portion of the report. So first I have some questions about the statistics. So the 18% high school and 24% middle school, is that a reduction from what we've seen in the past? How does that compare to past surveys?
Oh, that you asked me the one data point that I didn't look at, Gabe.
That's his job.
I know. So what I want to say is that we've stayed there we started the YRBS in our county in the mid 2000s. And from about 2005 to, I want to say about 2014, we steadily crept up. We've been, if I'm not mistaken, and I will say this data is on the Mecklenburg County Health Department's website, but if I recall correctly, we've been pretty steady over the last few years, which is frankly not where we want to be. We want to see it going down, but we have been pretty steady, and our YRBS data related to suicidal ideation is pretty consistent with national data. But again, this is an area where I'd happily be below average.
And then I noticed that one of the responses that you provide in the report was some more intensive counseling services. Maybe you could elaborate on like what makes it uniquely more intensive now?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So a few different options that we are either currently providing or in the midst of training staff to provide right now. So we have our school-based mental health program. That program, which again is in 137 schools, provides a therapist who delivers mental health treatment to students at school. And so we have 8 community partners who are mental health agencies who have access to their schools to provide mental health therapy in the school setting. Same thing you would get in the community, but it's just done at school instead. So that's one level of service that is probably the most intensive that we offer in the school building. That is a billable service. And I want to highlight that because most of our students who participate in that program have Medicaid. We've got an increasing number of students with private insurance who participate in that program. And I'm excited to say that over this current school year, we gained access to Title IV dollars, which have allowed us to cover the cost for services for students who are uninsured or underinsured. And so we've worked hard to remove all barriers to participation in the school-based mental health program. Frequently, our only barrier is either that the parent doesn't want it or the student doesn't want it, but we are in a position to be able to provide it to just about any student who wants it. The other work that we have undertaken is working to build and improve the clinical skill set of our counselors, social workers, and psychologists. So we are currently undertaking an evidence-based training called Match ADTC. The A stands for anxiety, the D stands for depression, the T stands for trauma, and the C stands for conduct. And the match part is, I'm going to match what your needs are. I'm going to match my curriculum, my counseling curriculum to your needs in one of those 4 areas. And that is an intensive one-on-one clinical counseling service that we're training social workers, psychologists, and counselors to conduct. And so our first 40 people will be ready to go with Match ADTC in the fall.
Okay. And then something that I think is a student concern that was unfortunately really prevalent in this past year was just generally what is the school response to tragedy, which is unfortunately like something we have to look towards in the future and something we have to address. But I was wondering about what are we doing to ensure that schools are sensitive and are caring about who is close to somebody who may be suffering from a tragedy related to suicide, and how are we making sure that those responses are uniform across the system?
That is a great question. So about 3 years ago, we introduced a crisis response mechanism called Prepare. And Prepare is, it's essentially a protocol for assessing and then responding appropriately to a crisis. And so in the example that you used, Gabe, related to, say, a student who completes suicide, one of the first things that the staff is going to do, and again, this is typically a member of your student services team, is the crisis response lead. They are going to first work with the administrator to ensure that we have the details of the situation correct. You would be shocked to know how often we get the wrong name or partial information about a student death. So the first thing we're working to do is confirm the information. But once we've confirmed the information and we've talked with the family, the next thing that we do is work to determine who is impacted by this student's passing. We're looking at things like how long was the student enrolled in this school? Were they on any sports teams? What clubs were they in? What was their class schedule? And then we're asking people who are their best friends, because each layer of relationship with the student is going to get a different type of response. The best friends, we're going to grab them and meet with them one-on-one. Those who are in classes, we're going to go to the class and we're going to support the teacher in doing a class meeting. So there's different levels of response based on our awareness of the student's relationship with the student who passed away. I'm sure sometimes we miss people, but we do our best to identify who the best friends are, as an example.
And just maybe, I don't want to say suggestion because it almost seems too insensitive for the topic, but maybe a comment on that is that generally from personal experience and from what I've heard, that might not be happening uniformly across our schools. The response is sensitive as you might have described. So I would encourage maybe you to look at the fact of how schools can create a general environment of what it is to mourn for people and what grief means for students generically. And I think that means making sure that we're not making announcements across schools that can be taken very, very differently from student to student, and making sure that if there are school-wide events that they're done with the most sensitivity and caution.
And I appreciate that feedback. And I will say one thing that I think we've also got to do is make sure that that environment exists before a student passes away, right? Because if it's a sensitive, caring environment before anything major happens, then that will continue. But if it was already questionable, then the likelihood that it's going to go well after a tragedy is not good. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schul, I learned more from your questions than anybody else's. Ms. Marshall and then Ms. Cheek.
I want to echo again what everybody has said about this report, because I have learned a lot, and it is just so detailed, and it's working smart. I mean, we're taking our assets, our people on the ground, and making them more capable to help our students, and I'm just so pleased. But I've got a couple things that I want to lift up and a couple sort of things I want to dive a little bit deeper in, 3 areas. The first, just to lift up, I'm so thankful that you all are working on this principal pipeline. I can't think of anything right now that's going to move our academic work better than having a strong leader in every school, and particularly this assistant principal development. That is massive, because we have needed that, and we've got a great bench of people, but it's just going to get better, and we're going to integrate all the great things that you're talking about, but we cannot do it without strong leadership in schools. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask one question on the school-based mental health services. You indicated we had 137 schools. What's the likelihood we can get to every school? Is that something we can accomplish this year? That's a big goal? Is it possible?
It is not possible that we will get there in a year. And this used to be my program a job ago, and what we consistently run into is that our agencies reach maximum capacity very fast. Yes. And so 5 years ago, we had 4 agencies. Now we have 8. It's taken us going up to 8 agencies to get to 130.
Wow. And I know our kids are going to need it when they come back.
Yes, they'll need it, but first I want to make sure that our staff has provided the maximum support that we are able to provide, right? The ideal for any family is that the student receive the lowest level of support necessary to address their needs. And so one of the things we work hard at is not going straight to school-based mental health unless we are clear that a student needs long-term treatment in order to get better.
Okay.
So I do want, our staff needs to be ready though.
Thank you. Good. At Caring Schools Community, that's something that I have been witnessing as being very successful in schools in my area. I believe you said we had 70 right now that we're in process. Can you give me an example of what a school-based meeting, I think the public would like to hear what that looks and feels like in an elementary school environment. Let's just, let's just talk about that for just a minute, what that might feel like.
Sure, absolutely. So the meeting model, the curriculum uses a standardized class meeting model. And I think it's important to state that first, because one of the things that we have to respect and understand about our classroom teachers is most of them did not get training in how to teach social and emotional learning. And so part of the reason I think the curriculum has been so successful is that it provides the format for lesson delivery. And the format is not sit and get, but it is a class meeting where we are all looking at one another and talking about whatever the curriculum content of the day is. And so the lessons within Caring Schools not only lead back to those 5 core competencies that you saw on my castle wheel on one of the slides, but they also have lessons built in to support teachers in preparing their class for things that are happening. And so an example, and I don't know why I love this example, but a new student is going to be coming tomorrow. So there's a lesson, a class meeting that they can have about how to prepare for and make that new student feel welcome. And imagine how meaningful that is to be the new kid in class and to walk in and they've already planned for how they're going to receive you. We had a student death at one of our elementary schools this year, and we lost a first grader. And part of what made that school's response to that incident so run so smoothly is that they were a Caring school, and the teachers knew how to pull the kids together and how to help them talk through their emotions and talk through how they're feeling about something that's really hard.
Yeah.
So does that help?
That helps. That helps. I just think that, you know, any type of, you know, we've obviously spent so much time on academics, but this is equally important, is how to regulate, how and just learning about ourselves and how to deal with others, because that's the end of the day. It's why we have a lot of problems that we have, because we don't have those skill sets. So I appreciate the emphasis, and I'm really happy that this is going so well. One last thing, I know that there's going to be a lot of discussion probably in the media on the numbers that you just reported on our COVID work, our street team work. And I just want to ask a couple things. I'm thinking about the wheel that you had, the 12% we did not get in touch. We haven't gotten in touch with. Of course, the day is not done tomorrow. We've got, you know, they're going to be beating it till the very end. And then we had, I think, 300 that as of last Friday, you were attempting, but you hadn't finished that. So my guess is by the time tomorrow ends, we will have probably south of 500 students that we've just not contacted. And is that fair to say?
Let me look again. So according to, our district's truancy and attendance specialist is managing the street team, and her last report to me as of yesterday is they expect it to be able to have made attempts on every student on the list.
That's amazing. Well,
They
I just think
have been out there.
that's incredible. And I've just heard stories. I've heard principals talk about the things they're doing, the sleuthing they're doing, and I just it has just gone on day after day after day to find students. And I just want our public to know how important that is and how thankful I am to those folks that have done that, because I would imagine that there are many districts that haven't even gotten close to the percentages we've gotten. But like I think we had talked earlier, that one student is too many. I mean, so we know that we want everybody. But I'm really very tickled at what we've been able to accomplish with that, and just so thankful. So
I'm sorry, I did want to add though that for those that we have not located, in many cases, the notes indicate that it looks like the home is vacant. And because many districts are not enrolling or parents are not attempting to enroll, I do believe in some of these situations, we have a family who's moved out of state or moved to another location, but because schools are not open in the traditional sense, they've not been able to contact us to request records to demonstrate that the student will or has in fact enrolled elsewhere.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm done.
All right, Ms. Cheek.
Thank you. Well, Gabe, you, as usual, ask a lot of the questions that needed to get more level of detail, especially with the suicidal ideation issues and those issues for students. In the north part of the county, we've had quite a negative run on student suicides, and it is something that Dr. Penn and Ms. Elling, I really appreciate the energy and that you have done with this. I know the suicide assessments, it's staggering. Many of them are done on a weekly basis, and staggering. Ms. Marshall touched on the other really big point that I had, that she basically just said, this is almost as equally important as academics. And that kind of makes me circle back to something that has been already said as well. So commentary and question at the same time. 10 years ago, the school board, we didn't spend hours talking about how we were meeting the social, emotional, mental health needs of our students. 15, 20 years ago, when you and I had kids in elementary school together, we didn't spend hours and hours talking about how we were addressing the emotional, mental health needs of those students. We worried about what their grades were, where they were in the reading scale, did they know their times tables, and those kind of issues. And when I hear members of other elected bodies talk about how we're neglecting students, we're not giving them what they need, and they're not being successful academically, I realize that we have this big giant mountain of academic success that we need to get to, and we have this mountain of social emotional health needs, and it becomes a choice of which mountain do you climb and how fast can you climb them simultaneously. And we're really caught up in that dual path right now of having them both meet their social and mental health needs and then serve them academically. Given our constraints of 180 days, quote, now 6 hours a day, and how do we, Dr. Penn, as you said, how do we overcome of nobody at home and gunshots in the street, not sleeping for fear of what's going on outside the door, and coming to the schoolhouse with more baggage than any of us on this panel will ever understand. Commentary, I know that was kind of a statement, but I want this community to understand this presentation is something that I want our partners at the County Commission to hear every detail, because when I look at the budget and the social and emotional mental health needs and the Department of Public Health and their social services department and mental health department, those actually fall under the County Commission services. I work with social workers every day because I'm a case manager in a different field, but I so deeply know the work that they do, and the services that we're now providing in the school. I feel like a great deal of them should be more collaborative with our county partners, make sure that we're meeting all these needs. We're now doing more than just educating kids. We are meeting their full rounded little lives and taking care of whatever they bring to our schoolhouse. So this is so important. I hope our media partners will make sure to get out there all the incredible work that is being done, because it really is a mountain that sits simultaneously right next to the academic mountain, and both of those mountains are something we have to work to climb. So I want to just applaud you. I'm so impressed with just the detail in this presentation, and as a couple of people know, executive summaries, but I like how you presented the details tonight to make it an executive summary with the meat behind it. So I appreciate that, and just keep doing this work. This is the work that will help us climb that mental health mountain, and hopefully then we can just take a bridge right over to the academic mountain. We don't have to go back to the bottom and climb it back up. I think this will help us bridge that. So
If it's okay, I'd like to kind of tie a bow on what you're saying, because what I would like to highlight is that what we're working really hard at is for these things not to be seen as siloed. And we can't do one to the exclusion of the other. And training, and so the Office of School Performance, as it's currently configured, has all of that work in one house, partnered with our academics team. So we're working to change mindsets around the fact that embedded social emotional supports is part of the curriculum, and there is a way to do it. We just haven't traditionally, to your point, Ms. Cheek, we probably should have been paying more attention to our kids' social emotional health 15 years ago and didn't. Now we are, and I'll end with this, by virtue of the fact that you have made it a priority as the board and the county has chosen to get on board and fund us with positions. It does take some people trained to embed that in the schoolhouse and train our teachers. So I think that's a good little closure, that the work continues. It's not siloed. And we're very grateful for your continued emphasis on it, because we believe it's deeply important, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
Madam Chair, the only thing I would add to that is, board members, you all may recall that earlier this school year, we had a joint meeting with our partners at the County Commission, and Dr. Penn had the opportunity to share a lot of what was shared tonight. Didn't specifically go into the work around COVID because it hadn't happened yet. But I know we did talk about the street team. And so I do think, to your point, it shows that this work is collaborative. It doesn't rest with one entity, and we're serving the same families across this community. I will say that we do have an opportunity to continue to share this good news that's happening, the services that are being provided. And I know with our new Assistant Superintendent for Communications, we will certainly take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, that sounds like a great note to end on, unless we have any more questions or comments from board members. Ms. Shipp.
Just wanted to add this one, and I know you all are aware of this, is that our teachers also have stresses. And I don't know if you remember, many of the principals, I was trained at the time in suicide prevention, QPR, and I think you may have remembered that, because we have some very young teachers in those classrooms too. And I actually had a situation where I had to take care of teachers who also had some of these same stressors that you're talking about with children. So I just wanted to share that as well, because they're the first line. And when you talk about climbing that mountain and coming together, our teachers also need that support. And I have had to see that play out in schools in the elementary level at that. And like you said, there's some great things going on, but please don't forget that those teachers as well, and I know you know, sometimes they are going through these changes. And I've had to deal with teachers that have come up with some real major issues, and it was at the school. So I want to make sure we continue to realize our teachers also need this support as well.
And so I would be remiss not to mention then that we have partnered with Mental Health America for the month of May to provide QPR training for any district supervisor, and we are targeting principals for that very reason. And the classes have been so popular that we've been asked to add more.
Thank you.
So that brings memories of former school board member Erica Ellis Stewart back into the room. And I'll just reiterate what Kathy Elling was saying about how our children's academic success is completely connected to their social emotional health, and many times academic turmoil is a reflection of trauma. And so I do see sometimes when I speak with constituents, I hear this is seen as a binary, like you're focusing so much on social emotional, that means you're ignoring the academics. And it really is important for us to be able to demonstrate how they're connected. And, you know, I guess there was a time in the good old days when we had ways in our society to help students with their social emotional needs and help within their families that just, for whatever reason, don't seem to be there right now. And kids are coming to school with so much more trauma that it is what it is, and we've got to address it. So thank you both for the work that you do. May it continue and may it grow. So we will now move to a report on capital project ordinances for April 2020, which I should have mentioned earlier. I will turn to the superintendent for this report.
As presented, Madam Chair.
All right. And then our next report is an update on student assignment considerations for Providence Spring Elementary and McKee Road Elementary. And turn to the superintendent for this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so as Akeisha Craven-Howe joins us, there she is. And so as you all will recall, Ms. Craven-Howe presented at the last board meeting, and we had a really good dialogue about this particular student assignment project. And so we are back before you this evening to share some updated information and some revisions that have been made. And so I am going to toss it over to Ms. Craven-Howe, who is our Associate Superintendent for Student Assignment and School Choice.
Akeisha, we don't have your audio if you're trying to present.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you.
Great, thank you. And so I will just share briefly a new scenario for consideration, as well as an update on the decision timeline and next steps for the student assignment between Providence Spring and McKee Road Elementary. Just as a reminder and to provide context for our viewing public, the map before you shows the attendance area for the two schools. You can see that Providence Spring is outlined here in yellow, and then McKee Road outlined in purple. I do want to point out that this map is not the map for the current school year, 1920, but is instead the map for the 2020-21 school year, because we know that there is an assignment change with the opening of Ray Farms STEAM Academy, which is here indicated by the star, that will take effect next school year and changes the McKee Road attendance area. When we look at the current and projected enrollment for the schools that we are considering, we can see that McKee Road is right at 100% utilization with 0 mobiles currently on campus, and Providence Spring, by comparison, is just over 130% utilization with 8 mobiles currently on campus and no additional space on site to add additional mobiles. I also show here below the 2 elementary schools, Crestdale Middle and J.M. Robinson Middle. These are the 2 middle schools that McKee Road and Providence Spring continue to. McKee Road with an intact feed to J.M. Robinson, and Providence Spring with a split feed to Crestdale and J.M. Robinson. Just as a reminder, McKee Road is right at 100% utilization. And so that means any additional students we would need to accommodate in mobile. And so the site can accommodate a 10 classroom modular, which is proposed here on the campus. You can see my cursor, and then up to 6 additional mobile units. For now, all of the scenarios that we are considering and putting before you and the public would be able to be contained within the 10 classroom modular. As always, just a reminder about our student assignment policy, JCA, which governs all of our work in the area of student assignment, as well as our analysis in consideration of these scenarios. So the new scenario to share with you and with our public this evening is the Violet scenario. It moves several areas from the Providence Spring attendance area to McKee. You can see those areas listed at the bottom right. Notably, some of the attendance area that is moved from Providence Spring attends currently J.M. Robinson for middle school, and the remaining pieces here are currently assigned to Crestdale Middle School. Part of the Violet scenario's proposal is because there are so few students in this particular area that are middle school aged, that we would assign that portion of the community to J.M. Robinson. As we look at the Violet scenario compared to the other 3 scenarios that are currently under consideration, blue, orange, and gray, we can see that the Violet scenario assigns 5 intact neighborhoods for a total of approximately 150 elementary school students. In terms of an intact feeder pattern, because it proposes a middle school change, we would be able to maintain McKee's intact feed. It does nothing to address the split feed out of Providence Spring. In terms of proximity, for some students, there would be a decrease in home to school distance, and for others, there would be little to no change. There's no real change in SES diversity, and utilization across all of these scenarios is relatively similar in that we are able to relieve Providence Spring and accommodate the enrollment increases in a modular unit at McKee. However, there are some concerns about the stress on core spaces like the media center and the cafeteria. I would point out in terms of utilization that the Violet scenario moves the fewest number of students as we compare across the other 3. As we look at the numbers, what you see here are projected enrollment for McKee Road and Providence Spring in the year 2024, given each of the scenarios. In the second row here, you can see, based on the 2024 utilization, the 2024 enrollment, what then the utilization would be. For each scenario, you see 2 utilization numbers for each school. The first one is without mobile, so just considering the number of classrooms in the core space. For McKee, that is 31 classrooms. The second number you see includes the mobile unit. And so at McKee, this assumes the 10 classroom modular, so adding 10 additional classrooms. At Providence Spring, we make an assumption that the 8 mobiles would remain on campus, though if they're not utilized, they might certainly be moved. I do want to acknowledge that you're seeing some different numbers for utilization than you've seen in previous reports. The difference here is that these numbers are based on our elementary planning capacity of 20 students per classroom and 20 students to a teacher. Previous analyses used for each school their current average student to teacher ratio. For McKee, that number is 18.54, and therefore would give you higher utilization. For Providence Spring, that number is 20.02, so there really is not much of a difference in the numbers that you see for Providence Spring. When we look at middle school assignments, that top table there is just a reminder of the current enrollment, the planned capacity, and projected enrollment for the 2 middle schools. The table below shows you for each of the 4 scenarios how many middle school students are in the portion that is proposed to move to McKee. The second row in the second table tells you where those middle school students are currently assigned. So for example, when we look at the blue scenario, in the portion that would move from Providence Spring to McKee, there are 127 middle school students there today. All 127 of those students attend J.M. Robinson. When we look at the violet scenario, in the portion that is proposed to move to McKee, there are 55 middle school students. 44 of them are in the part of the Providence Spring which attends J.M. Robinson, and 11 of them are assigned to Crestdale. Given that, the violet scenario proposes assigning that portion that moves to McKee Road to J.M. Robinson so that you do not have incredibly small cohorts. I mean, in this case, it would probably be 3 or 4 students per grade level, and they would be the sole students that would leave McKee moving on to Crestdale. I will acknowledge that the violet scenario would reduce the number of students that attend Providence Spring and continue to J.M. Robinson. And I acknowledge that simply because there have been concerns raised about small cohorts of students leaving elementary school and continuing on to middle school. So with the addition of the violet scenario, we now have 4 scenarios that are under consideration. Given that, we will have a community engagement session via live webinar on June 11th, and I will send out the information for logging into that webinar via our principal. We will introduce the gray and violet scenarios. And so while the board was introduced to the gray scenario during the last board meeting, we have not had a community engagement meeting yet that discussed the gray scenario. So on June 11th, we will introduce gray and violet scenarios, as well as remind the community of the blue and orange scenarios, and we will respond to questions during the live webinar. During the following week, we will post the recorded webinar, as well as the associated map, and any question and answers that we were not able to respond to during the live webinar. We will also at that time distribute a link to a follow-up survey. On June 23rd, there is a board meeting, and that had been the scheduled public hearing and vote. Instead, it will just be a public hearing because it will be the first time that the board will have had the opportunity to hear from the public related to the gray and violet scenarios. That then will move the vote on this assignment change to the July 21st board meeting. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Wonderful. So if I could get the gallery view back, then I can see who has questions. Right, any questions or comments? Ms. De La Hara?
Just 2 comments. Thank you for, I guess, giving us the outline of what's going to come throughout the month of June. I think from our last public hearing, what we really heard from the public was that folks needed more time to absorb this information. And so I'm glad that we're able to introduce these new ideas, have a new engagement, send out whatever information we need to, have another hearing. And I just think that responds very well to what the public was asking for. So thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to, I guess, just say, make a comment and say thank you for was the addition of this time of the utilization with the mobile units, because a lot of the feedback that I was getting was, you know, why are you moving the high, say 130%, I don't have it memorized, at Providence Springs over to McKee, but with the understanding that the mobile unit will actually go there, an option we don't have at Providence Springs, it lowers it back down to right around 100%, or I think in one of the scenarios it was at 90 something. So I just think that's very helpful for folks to understand so that they don't think that that's just the obstacle, the issue, just moving from one school to another. And it's because of the option that we have for the mobile unit. So that's very helpful, I think. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Mr. Strain?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Akeisha, can you go through the 10 classroom modular unit, where folks can find information on what that is? I mean, is it just 10 classrooms? Is it 10 classrooms plus lavatories? Is it, you know, that modular unit that goes in? Where can people get information on what that is and what that looks like?
I will reach out to my colleagues in facilities to get a detailed description of a modular, and I will make sure to include that in the June 11th information that I shared during the webinar, and also that we subsequently post on the website.
Great, that would be very helpful. I appreciate that. And,
sure.
And to Ms. De La Hara's point, the inclusion of both the utilization, including the mobile units that are planned, the modular at McKee, and retention of the trailers at PSE, I think is very helpful, as well as the difference in the calculation that you did in terms of doing the design capacity. Are there any plans or discussions about how to increase the core space or somehow make it more efficient at McKee? Because again, as we go, but not that McKee hasn't had trailers on that campus before, because it has, as we know. But we know there are some challenges with the core space currently. Has there been any conversations with facilities as to how you could provide some additional relief in the core space area?
I don't know that there are any plans related to a capital improvement in the core space area, but certainly I've been in close contact with the principal and will continue to do so, and can certainly also engage our facilities folks to see how we might use existing space more efficiently.
Okay, appreciate it. And just, I want to thank you for the inclusion of the Violet scenario here. That there is a lot of interest in the community, in my community, around the Violet. One of the very major issues, as we heard from speakers, as I've heard every day, many times a day, not just through emails, but through meetings with constituents down here, is that the middle school feeder is so critical, right? And it is reflected as such in our student assignment plan, but particularly when we get into the area of having a small cohort leave a school and be split off from their peers, when we're talking about on the order of 120 students to a grade, and then sort of taking 10 and asking those 10 to make their way to a new school without their peers. That's very difficult. You mentioned the concerns that have been raised about the cohort going to JM based on the decisions here. I don't think that the numbers are reflected there, but I do wonder if we could, on these, because of the specific concern that's been raised that you recognize, if we could look at the size of the cohort in terms of percentage, that would be going to which direction, to Crestdale and to JM with these different scenarios, because there are obviously a number of different ones. With Blue, what does that split look like? It's effectively what the split, I mean, that would clear it up. So it would be 100% each direction, right? So what is it today? What would it be for these different scenarios, particularly given the concerns around that cohort size? I think that would be very helpful if that information would be available.
I feel pretty confident I can get it for the current school year. I don't know that the projections are by grade level, but I will certainly check.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. Even percentages of current students, I think in the areas that we would be mapping, I mean, as opposed to projections, because obviously every year is different, right? And so I think even the percentages that would be mapped, you know, what is it today? What percentage of the students live in an area that goes to, you know, from PSE that goes to JM versus Crestdale? And then in each of the scenarios, what percentage of the students are zoned in a way, you know, if current students say would be zoned in a way that they would go one direction or the other. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think I could definitely do that.
Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much.
Yep, my pleasure.
Okay. So I will now turn it back over to you, Mr. Superintendent, for your own report.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Craven Howe, for that report. As you all know, graduation season is upon us. And so we will have the honor of celebrating members of the class of 2020 in the very near future. And part of that graduation experience will include, I want to highlight the drive-through diploma ceremony that will feature our seniors picking up their diplomas during that drive-through ceremony the day after their virtual graduation. That drive-through celebration will be held on campus, and it's intended to provide what we certainly hope will be a memorable experience for our students and families. So the cars will drive onto the campus. Students will and their families will be greeted by staff who will cheer them on as part of a celebratory procession that will also feature music and balloons. Students will also have an opportunity to momentarily step outside of the car and have their picture taken by a professional photographer as well. And so I am just extremely excited to be able to celebrate our graduates. And we want to make them all feel very special. And we realize that, you know, this celebratory period, this is a significant achievement that's taken place in extraordinary times. And so I would love it if our community collectively could help us all in congratulating all of our CMS graduates and wishing them well as they move forward to college, career, military, and other endeavors. And I want to say a special thank you to all of our principals, administrators, and teachers who I believe have gone above and beyond to really recognize members of the class of 2020. And last but certainly not least, I want to share some information on a topic that I know is top of mind for everyone, and that's school reopening. School is planned, of course, to start August 17th, and we understand how students, families, and the community, they want to know what will school look like. And so I am wanting to share that our leadership team in the district is actively engaged in planning for multiple scenarios that include in-person learning, remote learning, as well as a hybrid approach that includes some in-person and some remote learning. We expect to receive guidance from the state within the next week. But we continue to move ahead with our plans so that we can do everything possible to make that learning experience the best and the safest it can be for our students, our families, our teachers, and other school-based staff. Also think it's important to note that staff is discussing everything from classroom learning, what that will look like, social distancing in our facilities, buses, transportation, cafeteria, food service, and many, many other things. Our planning efforts include discussions of summer activities, including trainings for teachers and staff, and for our student and staff participation in athletic and other extracurricular activities that typically have practices and events during the summer break. And so I just want to close by saying that our commitment is to resume activities when it is safe to do so, and when we believe we have plans and procedures in place to ensure the safety and health of all students and staff. And as soon as our plans are clear, and once we have consulted with both our partners at the state and local levels to be sure that our procedures meet or exceed state guidelines, we will communicate in detail the how of reopening school for the 2020-21 academic year. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. At this time, I will recognize any board member who wishes to make a report. I see Ms. Byers-Bailey, and then Dr. Jones, and then Ms. Cheek. Ms. Byers-Bailey.
Thank you. Before I begin, I have a question for our superintendent. For those of us who said we would be wanted to participate in the graduation ceremonies, is our participation virtual or in person?
The participation for the drive-through ceremonies are actually in person. So students will actually get a chance to actually see you. You can certainly participate in the virtual ceremonies as well by watching it on our YouTube channel. But the actual drive-through ceremony is in person.
So we stand there while they take their picture? I guess I'm not able to visualize how that's going to work.
Thelma,
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Do you want to walk through the process now, or should we do that offline?
Well, I am happy to share some more information with board members that provide specific details and guidance in terms of exactly where you should go. Make sure that you have all of the information you need so that you're best prepared to participate in those ceremonies. And we'll get that to you ASAP.
And we have an email, board members, we have an email, I believe it's from either Nicole Kelly or from Dr. Matt Hayes with a sign-up sheet. So as soon as we sign up for that, we'll get follow-up instructions on where to park, where to go, you know, what kind of how distancing.
Great. All right. The other thing is during the events that have happened in the past few days, week, the first incident of protestation happened on Beatties Ford Road, and I live on Beatties Ford Road. So afterwards, I wrote a piece that expressed how I felt. And it says, as I continue my efforts to identify and eradicate institutional, systemic inequities, racism locally, the recent images on national television of police violence towards Black Americans makes my heart sink. I'm seeing racial profiling continuing to be used as a weapon against us. Sadly, these are not isolated events, but systemic symptoms of deeply rooted problems in our country. What happens to one of us anywhere is a threat to all of us everywhere. So then it should be no surprise to anyone that the cry of those who still feel unheard erupts into the protests of no justice, no peace in our own streets. I am most grateful for the restraint shown by the police officers the evening that we had the protestation on Beatties Ford Road. They put their safety and well-being on the line as they allowed those who feel marginalized express their frustrations. I'm saddened by the actions of those who took this as an opportunity to vandalize, loot, and destroy property in my neighborhood. Beatties Ford Road is calm now, and we started cleaning up the next morning. Would that it were as easy to clean up the hearts and minds of those who feel empowered to rekindle the entitled, bigoted behaviors that trigger events so ruinous for us all in the end. As I said, this was something I penned the day after the Beatties Ford Road incident. It exploded all over the country, all over the world in succeeding days, even up to last night. And it saddens me deeply. I have had problems even trying to talk about it, even as recently as today, because I don't see, well, I do see. It is our job to prepare the students in the coming weeks and years, as long as we hold these positions, so that they are more empowered in the future to feel less and less marginalized and more listened to. And that's my pledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Byers-Bailey. Dr. Jones.
I think this is a follow-up to what Ms. Byers-Bailey has just said. I want to talk about parent and community involvement, engagement, partnership. I use those three words because over the years, Title I and other federal programs have called it parent involvement, parent engagement, parent partnership. It all means the same thing, just the name changes for whatever the newest legislation is. We've heard recently, as tonight, the criticism about CMS effectively teaching our Black children. There's always more work, better work to be done. However, as an educator, much of what I've observed says we are trying. As I went around with Brian Kingsley last year, I believe it was, in what's called rigor walks or learning walks that they routinely do, I had the opportunity of seeing teachers teaching their hearts out, getting real-time critique on how to do even better from mentors. Schools and teachers are even buying every product that shows promise. Teachers doing all kinds of big bang things to try to engage students. Teaching is hard work. It's much harder than when I taught. Teachers are young. Most of, or if not all of my generation is just about retired. There are fewer minority students going into education. Therefore, we have more young white females. Can we do better? It was interesting tonight to listen to Dr. Penn's report and the things that are happening. And I was very much encouraged by that. However, the point I want to make tonight is we cannot be effective if we do not have tremendous parent and community partnership. Tremendous parent and community partnership. Parents entrust their children to the school, but there must be a joint mutual engagement. This is the only way the child will have the greatest opportunities. Where parents do not reach out to the school, our schools have to be creative, diligent, and genuine in building relationships. When I first came on board, I visited Hidden Valley Elementary School, a school that I was long familiar with because I had at one point lived in that community. I so admired in my visit the mutuality between home, school, and the joint, quote, high expectations from school as well as home. This dynamic makes a difference. That school is increasingly Latinx. These students speaking little English are making phenomenal gains because there is that great dynamic of mutuality in achievement, effort optimism, and good behavior. Good behavior necessary for learning. I'm sick and tired and sick of the blame game. Criticizing citizens need to engage. They need to partner, involve themselves in high-need schools to become a part of the solution. I so want to give a shout out to 3 ladies in my church who are dedicated school partners, Cindy Gill, Jeanette Price, and Inez Alexander. Also, in schools I've seen, for instance, Winding Springs, some older gentlemen volunteers who are so admired and so loved by the students in that school. At one point in the beginning, I thought they were actually grandfathers of the children there. But no, they were simply partners from Ebenezer Church. And as 2 of the grandfathers said to me, all of these children are my grandbabies. I'm going to say here what I said to some Black pastors a year or so ago. Get in here in CMS and become a part of the village. It is not easy, but I implore you to know firsthand what our schools are working hard to accomplish. We need the village to address high expectations, become involved, engaged, and partners, not just sideline critics. CMS needs the village to address high expectations. We as a community must stand up, but also show up for high expectations for our youth. And I'll close with this suggestion that we probably need to have a meeting of volunteers who go into especially our most high need schools and say a thank you to them, but hear their perceptions. There are some good things going on in our schools, and I wanted to end, especially after the criticisms that began our board meeting tonight, with saying thank you to our teaching staff. Yes, there are places we need to get better. That's always been the case. We need to work on those diligently, but thank you to the teachers.
Thank you. So I see Ms. Cheek, then Ms. Marshall, and then Ms. Ship.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Dashu, Chairwoman Dashu. First thing I'd like to do is recognize the North Carolina High School Sports Athletic Association. Last week announced their People of the Year, and CMS and William A. Huff High School is thrilled to say that our 10-year athletic director, Ms. Maury Taguchi, was selected as the High School Athletic Director of the Year for the state of North Carolina. Coach Taguchi has been a great influence in my son's life and the lives of so many athletes at Huff High School. He has been there since the school started, and we appreciate his dedication. And this is a much deserved recognition of North Carolina for all that he does in our region and in the state. So that's number one. Number two, Mr. Winston, I want to thank you for highlighting what you said about graduation. Change the word a little bit here. And as of a 2020 grad, I'm just going to take a little personal liberty. It's not a drive-through graduation. Drive is what I away way too often. What we're doing is hybrid in-person graduation. It's not the same outside of the box, and we're going to get outside the car when we get in those lines and we drive through next week at all of our schools. And I know they're going to have amazing. I've seen the plans. In addition to that, I've never seen students celebrated. They've been by their schools over the past few weeks. I've seen parades from all parts of the county. I saw the West Charlotte Alumni Association had a giant billboard on the interstate for their grads. I've just seen our whole community reach out and celebrate them. And like you said, our principals and our staff at our schools have gone way beyond anything that we've ever imagined. I think you and Dr. Hayes and Condra Ratley kind of told them we need to do something special to make these kids feel special. Those principals have taken it and gone to a level that I would have never dreamed of. And I'm so thankful for how we have supported kids and how the teachers and the staffs have all gotten involved. And so I want to say, we're not going to call it a drive-through virtual anymore. We're calling it a hybrid in-person graduation, because that's what it is. My son's getting out of the car. He's going to go be handed his diploma in a private moment where he doesn't have 7 other kids swarming the stage trying to take his shine off of him. And our teachers and staff are going to be all day on those days celebrating those kids. So we need to change the narrative to our in-person graduations next week. And I'm not going to go into any more detail. I so appreciate the words of our Vice Chair, Ms. Byers-Bailey, and my colleague, Dr. Jones, who always speaks from my heart. Sometimes I feel like I'm channeling right through you, Dr. Jones, and what you said tonight. I would like to say that as a white parent in Mecklenburg County, a white woman who has lived a life of privilege because of the color of my skin, with many challenges because of other issues, did not have those same issues because of the color of my skin. I am very cognizant of my need to not be silent and to stand up and support my and fellow members of my community are suffering from continued injustice and police brutality. So I want to stand beside everyone, and I wish we could all be standing beside each other right now. I feel like if we were together tonight, we would be standing together in unity at the close of our meeting as a show of unity and support. So I do virtually and virtually reach out to all my colleagues, and I just anxious for can all commune together and have our meetings in person. And that'll be all.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Marshall and then Ms. Shipp. Mute.
Thank you. Story of our lives. So I think that this week we are living in a week where everything changes. I really believe that. I think this is one of the most unique weeks any of us will ever experience. And we can't come out of this the same way. We just can't. Folks are going to have different ideas on how we come out of this and what the changes are going to be, what they should look like. But I do believe that probably most people can get behind one common thought, and is that children deserve a great education. That should unite us. And I know it does for every person on this board. And as you said, I wish we could stand together, because I think that's what we feel and that's what we're about. And our focus needs to be on the students, what they need both academically and emotionally. So we had a pretty well-timed report tonight to emphasize that. We're going to have to also take care of the people who educate our students and compensate them and give them a safe and healthy work environment. This is not cheap work. We will ask for what we need, and we will be clear about it, and we will talk about the impacts when the funds aren't there. Can we do a better job of educating our Black and brown children, as Dr. Jones just alluded to? Yes, we can. Absolutely, we can. The work of closing achievement gaps is front and center for Team CMS. It is talked about all the time, and I'm going to just reach out and emphasize a little bit more about that. And again, as a white woman who has learned immense amount from the people that I serve with, the people that I serve with on staff, the things that I see in our schools, I am humbled all the time by the commitment of Team CMS to close achievement gaps. But sustainable, scalable progress in this effort is long-term. It is systemic change work. It is not overnight. And it's going to take alignment. It's going to take resources and understanding. And we are working harder and smarter to make this happen. Can we communicate the ways we're doing this work better? Yes, we can. It is data-driven and often culture changing. And sometimes it's kind of deep in the weeds to explain. So we're going to have to ask people to pay attention while we do a better job of letting folks know the plan and what they can expect. But we're going to need the community to listen and not just rely on old, tired narratives. One thing I want to say about our students too, they are more than just a letter grade on the school that they attend. It is easy to look at our school grading system that we have in North Carolina and say, that school over there, that's a failing school. Only 20%, think about this, 20% of the letter grade given to a school in North Carolina measures what happened in that school during that year. A full 80%, frankly, tells us the type of student that walked in that door. Were they prepared at home or not? That's pretty much what it tells us. None of us want our children to go to failing schools, none of us. But maybe the measuring system is broken and not our kids. This is a year of disruption and things should not look the same when we come out of this. I don't want things to look bleaker for a large chunk of our students. It just won't come easy or cheap to make this happen. It's going to take partnership with our county, with our state, and our federal partners. And we're about doing that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shipp.
So much has been said, and I want to just kind of concur with Ms. Byers-Bailey and Ms. Jones. I grew up on Betty's Ford Road, and I also felt deeply about what has been happening, the injustice. And just, I have friends still live on Betty's Ford Road, and I also had a deep experience and moment with all that happened in these upcoming days that are continuing and the days that have passed. I first though want to say, as it relates to our children, that as we come to the end of a physical school year, I want to thank all of CMS staff, starting with our superintendent and his great words that you brought together, and so many teachers and staff were so just taken by you reaching out and sharing your feelings about what happened during this time with George Floyd. So I thank you. I want to thank the central office staff, the executive staffs, but most importantly, the work of the school level principals, administrators, the teachers, the teacher assistants, the support staff, the cafeteria workers, the frontline employees, our street team, our community partnerships. We could not have done this work this year, this quickly, with remote learning without all that happened, the pacing of it all. And many teachers talked about how they got great support from CMS to do this work. And I thank you. And I thank them, because teaching and learning continue. Even with the difficult times that we're having, it continued. I had an opportunity to continue to work with the Equity Committee and met on some committee meetings recently. And they too talked about this work of how do we continue to greatly educate our children. They talked about principal pipeline. They talked about great leaders that make a difference in all our schools. And how do we retain and hire and keep the great people in the schools that will make a difference. So this was good. Chiquita Lord's department continued to have diversity and inclusion and sensitivity training. I don't know if you know, throughout this time of remote learning, teachers participated greatly in this training, and they got good turnaround and good participation. So much is happening. That's good. But I do know, as an African-American Black female who has been in education all my life. I spent over 35 years in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, a teacher, a principal, a parent of a Black child in this school district. I know what it looks like for our children and working in high poverty schools. We have work to do. Every one of our children deserve the best that we have to give. And we know that the opportunity gaps are large among our children of color. We have to do better. I'm committed to action, to do all that I can. And I know our board is, and our community. And it's going to take each and every one of us, the city, the county, and the school board, developing a relationship where we work together to make things happen for our children. We can't do it. As someone mentioned, it takes a village. The quality of our children's education, more today than ever before, with everything that is going on, depends on what we do and what we do today. How well we educate each and every one that crosses our doors throughout Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. The social, the emotional, the mental, and the physical that has been talked about greatly affects academics. We can do it. We have done it. It will take alignment, as someone mentioned, fidelity, high expectations, making commitments that we uphold, and continuing to sustain the work. We have been here in some places before, but we have not continued to sustain, to do things with fidelity. We have great plans. We must get them right. We must get them right for all children. And I know we can. I've been in the trenches to do the work. If not now, then when? If not us, then who? On behalf of all our children, we must continue to do this work. It is not enough. It is not enough right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sawyer, and then Ms. De La Hara.
Thank you. I really appreciate the words of my colleagues in expressing the urgency. And I also appreciate the words of our community members who expressed their frustration and concern at the treatment of their African-American children. I think we need to acknowledge that our schools are a microcosm of our larger culture and community. Our society was built and is maintained by a system of white supremacy. These words are hard to hear, but true. As a white person, it's sometimes hard for me to see the white supremacy surrounding me. My family has been a direct beneficiary of this privilege. The consequences of that system creates and maintains the racial disparities that we see in all aspects of our lives, from maternal and infant mortality to wealth accumulation, incarceration, and yes, educational opportunities. As a board, we must root out the policies and practices that support white supremacy and dismantle them. We heard tonight about the great efforts to provide behavioral supports for students so that as an institution, we become more focused on proactively addressing addressing student needs rather than reacting with disciplinary measures. I applaud these efforts, but I'm frustrated that we don't have the funding to implement these programs at the scale of the need. Our pupil assignment policy reinforces and exacerbates the segregation in our community. The homeschool guarantee in pupil assignment recreates segregation recreates the segregation in our neighborhoods. Dismantling that segregation will require white families to sacrifice a bit of convenience and comfort for justice. And I hope that we can find the community will to dismantle our segregated schools. Thank you.
Ms. De La Hara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to mention briefly and thank Ms. Marshall because I thought her comments were really poignant about the measuring system that's used. And I know there's probably a lot of confusion that's out there in the community. But literally just an hour ago, I got a text from someone who said, can you describe to me what a good school is? And I know what they're looking at and the data that they're looking at, and it can be very misleading. So I appreciate you bringing that up because it was so timely with what I had just seen. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Ms. Byers-Bailey and Dr. Jones and Ms. Shipp in particular for sharing your thoughts tonight. I appreciate learning from your perspective in particular. As I've ventured out, mask on this week to 2 lawful protests with my children, I have looked around and I said to my kids Tuesday night, I said, we're witnessing a significant moment and I really want you to take this in. It certainly wasn't the first protest that I've ever attended, but something feels different. And I'm hopeful, I guess is just what I want to share, that things will be different. There's so much that's going on in our country right now. And I also didn't want to miss the opportunity to address a slightly different topic, which is the DACA decision that we are expecting any day now. I know that there is a lot of uncertainty felt by many in our community right now. What I don't know is how many staff members and teachers in CMS may be affected by this upcoming Supreme Court decision. If it's 1 employee or it may be 50 employees. So I just want to say to you, if you're listening, if you are a DACA recipient and a CMS employee, that we see you. We know this is a very unsettling time for you, and that CMS will be here to support you as best we can. I also want to speak from the heart about some things that were said during the Tuesday night meeting of the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners. Like all of us, I'm deeply troubled by by what I heard. Some of it was true and some of it was not true. And I'd like to address some of that now. There is no doubt that there are serious achievement disparities linked to race, ethnicity, and poverty in our district. That is true. What is not true is that we lack a plan to address these disparities. We are working to address them on multiple fronts: our budget, our strategic plan 2024, our academic oversight plan that we had a report on last week, and of course we heard part 2 of that this week. It should also be noted, although no mention was made of this by the County Commission, that we have an effective, caring superintendent with integrity. I believe that Ernest Winston is capable to lead our dedicated educators for many years to come, continuing to close achievement gaps. And those gaps are not just a CMS problem. They are a challenge for every district in America. I know that we are doing more and doing it more effectively than many other districts. We will continue to do that and continue to make improvements in our own district. There was also a passing mention at the commission meeting Tuesday night of the Leandro case. And I wanted to set the record straight on this as well. CMS actually presented a proposed improvement plan to the judge many years ago. It was accepted and we complied with those directives. It's also very important to mention that to date, the state legislature, the governing body the judge ruled has underfunded education, has still not responded to the financial investments that he laid out in his order. We also had a plan to get our much appreciated and deserving hourly employees to $15 an hour. Unfortunately, it appears that some of my colleagues on the county commission ignored our plan that existed and instead chose a narrative where they would just sweep in and declare that they would be making sure that we paid a living wage, something that they are actually unable to guarantee themselves to their own custodians who are contracted out and make less. I fully support $15 an hour. What I can't support is being handed a mandate to do it all at once without additional funding. Some commissioners announced that they served on the school board, so I was surprised by their lack of understanding of how we can't just move around funds at will. And instead, they want us to rebalance the budget by the end of the month, which will most likely, of course, result in job cuts. There are two things that disturbed me most about this unfunded mandate. First is that it will cause our children to suffer. Show me one example of when cutting funds has helped low socioeconomic students. You won't find one. I have been speaking with principals and educators over the past week who actually work in these disadvantaged schools, who explained to me that losing resources and people, human resources, means losing achievement gains with their students. These cuts will fall hardest on children who are already struggling because of disparities. We will do our best with the situation at hand to make wise cuts, but it is really unfortunate to be put in this situation. The second thing that disturbs me is that we were handed this unfunded mandate with no advance warning. We are a nonpartisan board, and I recognize that. But the reality is we are predominantly a Democratic board, and the county commission is all Democrats. My Democratic values propel me to find the best, fairest solutions to our challenges. I would have expected my 9 fellow Democrats on the commission to share my values of collaboration. I would have expected them to approach us months ago to address their concerns, but they didn't. Instead, these unfunded mandates have landed on us out of the blue. I would have also expected the commissioners to do this because by statute, the Board of Education is held accountable for school and student performance. It is simply not the statutory responsibility of the county commission to micromanage our budget and our board. When the commissioners are approached by constituents about education issues, the appropriate response is to redirect those constituents to us because we are responsible. The voters hold us accountable, not the commission. People write me all the time to complain and sometimes praise education decisions that were made in Raleigh. I spend the time to educate my constituents on where to send both their angst and their praise, if it's not in my purview. Sometimes when folks go meddling around in areas that it's not your responsibility, mistakes happen, and sometimes costly mistakes that sadly affect our children. And lastly, I just want to say that the issues here are not merely political or ideological ones. They are matters that affect the future of our children. I don't want to see the elected officials in Mecklenburg County fall into a political trap set by Raleigh that underfunds education and pits local officials against each other. The work is too important for us to do that. And I hope sincerely that we can find a way to resolve these issues fairly and collaboratively. We owe that to our children. I joined this board because I want to do the work to improve our schools, and I respectfully ask that our county commission join us in this most important work, not hinder us with unreasonable and inappropriate last-minute demands and threats to withhold funding. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Schewel.
Black Lives Matter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Schewel. Anybody else? All right. I will just close with a statement to say that if you work for CMS, you have chosen a very hard job, and there is no job more honorable. And so as we end this school year, I want to salute every single one of our employees, whether you are in the schoolhouse or whether you are supporting an employee in the schoolhouse. You have handled this pandemic heroically with grace and agility and incredible sacrifice. And I know that you will continue, no matter what the summer may bring, no matter what August may bring, you will continue to show up for your kids, no matter what gets thrown at you. And I am just so proud of you and so grateful for you. And so with that, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a motion from Ms. Cheek, a second from Ms. Sawyer. All in favor, please raise your hands and say aye.
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 Any opposed? And seeing no opposition, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Good night.
See you guys in 3 weeks.
Thank you,
Yes.
board members.